Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Evidence-Based Design Journal Club. I'm Sheila Bosch, your host for today. I have the privilege of serving as Gresham Smith and Partners Director of Research and leading the evidence-based design research efforts here. And the purpose of the Journal Club really is to provide a forum of discussion and exchange of information to the healthcare design community to really begin to apply the research into practice. Now, today, there are continuing education units available, both for the AIA and also for EDAC. So to receive your credit for participation, you can download these forms at any time by clicking on the Show My Media Library icon located at the top of the toolbar where there's a red arrow pointing that you'll see here on the slide. And you'll have access to the AIA quiz, the EDAC form, and today's presentation slides. So to download a file, you'll just click on the green arrow next to the file. When you're finished, click the double right arrow in the top left corner of the media library, and the library will close, and then the slides will refill the empty space. For your EDAC credit, you will need to complete the verification form and retain it for your records, which you will then submit to CASA Worldwide at the time of your renewal. If you'd like AIA credit, complete the verification quiz, purchase a CEU management fee for $10 from the CHD store, and submit the verification form to Shannon Reckline, and she will then upload the credits to your AIA account. And you'll find Shannon's email address on that form as well. And I'd like to make sure that all of you are able to chat. You'll see here the red arrow pointing to the chat box. And what we'd like for you to do is, as you have questions or comments throughout the presentation, go ahead and type those in. Now, be sure and type those to the all box as opposed to the moderator box, unless you have technical difficulty. And then if you have some of that, just go to the moderator box and you can send a private note, and we'll try to fix any problems that you may be having. This event is scheduled for 1 hour. If we find ourselves with unanswered questions at the end, the authors and I have all agreed to stay on for a few minutes extra. If you need to leave, don't worry. You can still hear that discussion because the session is being recorded and will be available on the CHD's website very soon after the event. So now I'd like to introduce our authors. We are very privileged today to have actually the 3 authors from this study on our call today. Our first author, Kara Freihofer, is a design researcher at HGA Architects and Engineers, specializing in evidence-based design, user experience, and human interaction with the built environment. And her experience as a practicing interior designer combined with her graduate education focus on design research provides a unique and diverse background linking design and research. And Kara is part of the research collaborative team at HGA, where she helps spearhead healthcare research initiatives. She received her PhD in design research from the University of Minnesota. Welcome, Kara.
Thank you.
And our next speaker, Christine Vickery, is Vice President and Senior Interior Healthcare Designer with HGA Architects and Engineers in Minneapolis, where she works with national healthcare systems to design supportive, healing healthcare environments that inspire patients, family, and staff. She does speak regularly at conferences and contributes to industry journals on healthcare design topics, and she writes a healthcare interior design blog for Healthcare Design Magazine. And Christine is working on a new book with her HGA colleagues, Gary Nyberg, our third speaker, and Douglas Whitaker. And the book is called Modern Clinic Design, Strategies for an Era of Change. And that will be published next year by Wiley Publishers. So welcome, Chris. And Gary. Gary is recently retired, although I suspect you're probably just as busy now as you were before. But he was the vice president and principal for the healthcare practice group at HGA, and he has more than 30 years experience as a medical planner, master planner, and designer for healthcare projects nationally, ranging from community clinics to replacement hospitals, acute care centers, community hospitals, surgical suites, and other facilities. Throughout his career, he has served as an informed advisor to healthcare clients on demographics, financial and technological changes impacting the healthcare industry. And he continues to research how evolving legislation will affect changes in the healthcare delivery process. And as I mentioned, he is a co-author for the Modern Clinic Design book you can be on the lookout for next year.
Thank you.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we are hosting this event really to look at everyday practical applications of research findings in a published article. And your article today, Clinic Exam Room Design, Present and Future, was published in the Spring 2013 edition of the Health Environments Research and Design Journal. If you haven't subscribed to that, audience, I do encourage it. It's an excellent resource. And we will begin covering the objectives and research methods and definitions for the study, review a few selected prototypes for the discussion, and then after looking at the design implications, we should have some time for additional questions towards the end. But as I said, do feel free to type those in as we go along. So to my authors, thank you for delving into this topic of research where there really is very limited evidence and research in the literature. And we hope to engage in a really active discussion about some of the different components of your study. And audience, feel free to pose questions. So, Kara, I will pass this on to you now to give us a little bit of the objectives, the background, the methods, and delve into some of the prototypes.
Thank you, Sheila, for that wonderful introduction. And like you were just saying, there is a relative lack of evidence and research regarding ambulatory care settings in patient exam rooms and specifically. But I'd like to begin by saying that this article stemmed from a broader publication involving ambulatory care settings, and we decided to focus on the patient room because this is where a majority of the patient's clinic experience and interaction occurs, and because there is a general lack of information and research that is published out there. The purpose of this article was to outline the design qualities that focus on the patient, particularly the privacy, the safety, and the comfort, and to support these qualities with any kind of empirical evidence when we are able to find what we are able to find. For this reason, this article serves as a broad literature review. Although this publication was published a year ago, there has been some recent publications on ambulatory care settings. However, this is there is still a general lack of evidence in this area. At the end of the presentation, we will identify some areas of future research. In the next 15 to 20 minutes, we would like to talk through some of the prototypes in the article and point out design qualities. As we do this, you will see that there are usually trade-offs to each quality. One decision may influence the decision of another quality, such as the orientation and location of exam tables in relationship to the entry door, as it influences patient privacy and their level of anxiety. But we would like to point out that this article does not discuss materials, finishes, selections of interior elements, but rather it really focuses on planning-related details. As I just mentioned, we're really focusing on exam rooms as it relates to overall size, location of door and privacy curtains, positioning of exam tables, influence of technology in the consultation area, the types of seatings, and placement of sinks and hand sanitizer dispensers. We also explore a prototype related to group exam and the Exam Plus room.
We thought we'd talk a little bit about different types of care models for exam rooms, and the first is the one-stop exam room. And in the one-stop exam room, that's where all the care is provided within one room, such as taking vitals, lab draws, and rescheduling. The second type is the universal exam room. Universal exam room really means that all types of medical primary care and specialties can occur in the same type of room, most specialty care. And it is one that also looks specifically at a universal design where the sink is always located in the same place in the room, and the primary advantage of that has been acoustic improvement. A medical home is another model we'd like to talk about. Again, the room size and design would be affected by additional providers that would be coming into the room and being a part of the process. And also, as Kara mentioned, the group exam room. And the group exam room is really, it's a size and design that's a combination of a number of exam rooms, and it's used for education and therapy consulting. And finally, telemedicine, as the room design and configuration is affected by the technology that's needed to allow for telemedicine consults in those exam rooms. And finally, the two care zones that we're talking about within the room are the physician area, which is both sides of the exam table and the charting desk, and the patient and family area is the other zone within the room. We'll be describing those for each of the prototypes.
So before we begin going through the prototypes, I wanted to mention that the ones that were selected for the article were actually selected from a larger group of 15 to 20 examples. And we selected these because they represent a range of combinations of some of the qualities that we will be discussing. And also, for this presentation, we assigned names to each of the prototypes to help identify them throughout the presentation. We had not focused on the size of the case goods, as this detail is more specific to the specialty and exam needs. But the prototypes do have these in there, and they flex between 3 to 4 feet wide, and there's also options for upper cabinetry. Also, these prototypes range in size between 100 and 120 square feet, with the exception to the group exam and the bariatric exam. However, these sizes may actually change in the future as care models are moving towards a more patient-centered approach, or even shrink when they are moving towards a telemedicine or remote exam. This prototype here is prototype A. And we named it the traditional prototype because it's something that we probably all have designed with or seen before, had experience in before. What I like to point out is that the patient and family zone is towards the front of the room, placing the physician zone towards the back of the room. And you'll see this repetitive throughout all the prototypes. It will be called out on the left-hand side. Also, the dimensions around the perimeter of the room and the overall square footage in the lower right-hand corner. What I'd like to point out with prototype A is that it maintains patient privacy from corridor activities, and we do this by placing the exam table in the front of the room and making the entry door, a reversed hinge where the door swings, the side of the door swings towards the patient. And this blocks the view of the exam. It also eliminates the need for a privacy curtain and other issues of cross-contamination that come with that. It also eliminates the need to pull and laundry costs associated with privacy curtains.
And as we know, just sorry to interrupt, but we know those privacy curtains just really don't get cleaned very often. So it's really great if you can not have one. But as you mentioned before, there are trade-offs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and we'll mention that in just a second here. But what we do need to do when we do a reverse hinge is comply to the ADA standards. So you have to allow for an 18 inches on the adjacent wall or the pull side of the door. So as you were alluding to, Sheila, in prototype B here, It's very similar to prototype A, the traditional model. It's a foot wider, but the door opens into the room, and now we have a privacy curtain that divides the room. And this is a great prototype for the patient to dress and undress while family members and interpreters and even the physician is still in the room, can remain in the room. However, when the curtains are fully extended, the space allocated to the exam portion on the right-hand side is reduced, and the physician's is separated from the charting area during exams. And as Sheila was just mentioning that, these curtains do pose a hazard. One study that we have found has shown that these privacy curtains are usually not properly utilized, or they're underutilized, and they usually remain open. Most of the studies related to privacy curtains in the realm of infection control are on the inpatient side. And one of the studies related to that has found that after installing new laundered curtains in 1 week, there was 92% of the curtains were contaminated, and of the ones that were contaminated, 21% actually had the bacteria MRSA on it.
Prototype C, we're calling Caregiver Access, and this is the door swings into the room in a fairly typical fashion. This configuration really allows for a lot of flexibility in the future if the room use ever changes and this becomes either a consult space or some other type of function. It doesn't have that reverse swing door. But it gives immediate access for the care provider. The sink is right inside the door so they can wash their hands immediately, and the charting is right next to it. It also provides a fair amount of additional space for the patient and family that might accommodate a stroller, wheelchair, any additional things by having that section of the room really private for that patient. One thing also on this is that research by Mayo has shown that placing the exam tables near the back of the room de-emphasizes the physical examination portion of the appointment. It does compromise patient privacy, although in most cases, as we've surveyed a number of care providers, it rarely, if ever, happens that they would be interrupted during an examination and that door would be opened. But some people feel that just the fact that it could be opened is enough of a deterrent and could compromise privacy.
And we had a question come in too, Gary, looking at talking about the orientation. So the care provider here would have their back to the patient while they were documenting, and I guess that's one of the sort of negatives to this particular configuration, perhaps.
That's if in fact there is a fixed computer being used for charting. That's true, and although in many cases laptops are used and there's a there can be a fold-down shelf adjacent to the exam table that could be used for charting in the case of care providers using laptops.
Thank you.
Sure. So prototype D is based on a configuration where there is a work core separate from the patient corridor. So the patient, in this case, accesses the room through the swing door on the bottom side of the plan, and the care provider accesses the room through the sliding door on the top side of the plan, and from their work area. The table configuration for this room is also so that the care provider and the patient and family member can be face-to-face looking at each other, either sharing a computer screen, or in some cases they've had dual computer screens to make access a little bit easier. There is additional space. If additional guest chairs are wanted, those are dotted in. And again, this one provides that sink immediately as you come in through the door for hand washing from the care provider side.
Yes, and what we found with some of the research is that the consultation table where the patient and visitors and physicians can all sit at the same plane, actually helps to entice and increase communication. Also, it was found that there's a significant increase in patient satisfaction in the location of the computer and the ability to view the monitor at any time of the appointment from that half-round console table. And providing patients with the identifiable table space for note-taking encourages greater interaction, engagement, and participation.
And this particular room configuration can also be used for self-rooming, and is a popular orientation for that.
One thing I'd like to mention too is on that one is the sliding door in the work from the work corridor, and I just I know that most codes don't allow them as the primary door, but boy, they sure do help save space, don't they?
Right. The sliding door, as long as there's a swing door from that work core space, you can use a sliding door. They also need to be sound gasketed fairly carefully, because that is an area where either door is really the biggest sound leak into those exam rooms. Okay.
So prototype E, we're taking a look at hand hygiene here in this module, and with the modules that we're using primarily today, it necessitates that caregivers need to use hand sanitizers 20 to 30 times a day, or per an 8-hour shift. And so locating the sink near the door, as we've seen on other modules such as C&E, as one way to prompt caregivers to wash their hands, but then also having the hand sanitizer there as well. One study that was done in an inpatient setting found that telemetry nurses used the hand sanitizer 27 times a day, used the dispenser. And that was in public areas, but then when it came to private areas, they were using the hand sanitizer up to 90% of the time. So it was really working. So we're always looking at ways of trying to get that hand sanitizer being used. One of the things is just the general overall behavior of the staff, and having a program available that really teaches staff to use the hand sanitizer. There was a study done where there were multiple hand sanitizers, more than 2 done, and it was found that really more than 2 didn't really up the ante anymore. It seemed that people really used, if there were 2, that was going to get the maximum benefit out of the hand sanitizer dispensers. So prototype F, just looking at the exam itself. And in some specialties, the goal is to have 360-degree access to the patients. And some of those are ENT, orthopedics, OB/GYN, et cetera. And so this is an example of having that reverse swing on the door. Once the door is closed, there is really clear access around the table. In a pediatric setting, of course, you want the table up against the wall. And then the majority of physicians or care providers are taught to do exams from the right-hand side, because the majority of people are right-handed. And so this particular layout really helps with that. And then prototype G really looks at flexibility, and in this case, the patients are seated right next to the desk. The desk is a modular unit. A bench is a positive thing in a pediatric situation, especially. There may be younger children. It's also good in a specialty where you may have other family members coming along. Oncology is one that comes to mind, where you may have others coming into the exam with them, and they may want to be seated next to the patient.
And I guess that could also double for bariatric seating, I would imagine, correct?
It can, if it accommodates the bariatric requirements for weight, et cetera. Okay. So looking at prototype, the bariatric prototype, this is one that was not in the original article, but we decided to include it because we felt that there were some key things to talk about here. again, staying on the topic of seating, bariatric seating is wider, it's deeper, it accommodates a higher weight, has strength and support. In the U.S. alone, 70% of adults and 32% of children are considered obese. And so this bariatric room is becoming more and more important. A bariatric patient coming into a facility is going to be a lot more at ease just knowing there is a bariatric room available. So that's something that we can do to accommodate them and to lower their stress. Again, a bariatric chair can be used with or without arms. So occasionally we'll do them without arms, but with arms is always a benefit. Of course, with elderly patients, with arms is always a benefit. And then other types of seating, which may or may not be appropriate for a bariatric, but as long as we're on the topic of seating, is in a smaller space or a tight-knit space, fold-down seating can be an added benefit, something that can be used at the last minute.
All right, thank you, Chris. I just want to clarify that caregivers do have the possibility of actually washing their hands or sanitizing their hands between 30 and 40 times throughout a day shift. And that's important to note. What we have done here is created a graph and to show the different types of combinations with the design qualities we just discussed. And as you can see, the typical square footage range is between that 100 and 120 range. Bariatric was larger. In addition, the graph outlines whether the patient zone, where the patient zone and the exam table and sink location are, if they are in the front or the back of the room. What is unique, or what we actually found when we were looking at this table, is among these three qualities, typically when there's two of them in one location, the third one is always the opposite. So, for example, in prototype D, has the patient care zone and the exam table position in the front of the room, and the sink location is actually towards the back of the room. While prototype G has the exam table and the sink location in the back of the room and the patient zone towards the front of the room. We also outlined if there was a privacy curtain and the orientation of that curtain. And in these examples, if a privacy curtain was not used, the door swing was always in the reverse positioned, and that was to help to maintain patient privacy. One thing that we didn't mention about this reverse door, although it is advantageous because you don't have to have the privacy curtain, it is hard to reconfigure that room for future uses, even if it's not just an exam room, if it turns into a conference room. It is an awkward placement for a door swing.
This table is actually very helpful. I think it gives us a great sort of overview of the different prototypes that you've outlined. Thank you.
Yes. So now that we've reviewed some of the standard outpatient exam rooms, we would like to continue our discussion with the group exam room and the exam plus room prototypes.
So the next image shows a group exam room, and this particular group exam room occupies a space of roughly 4 typical exam rooms. So, and that's because in many cases healthcare systems are not quite sure they're going to work out, so they want some flexibility to convert in the future. And most people, when they hear group exam for the first time, are kind of wondering, what do you mean group exam? That seems a little odd. Well, typically, the group exam is an area where anything that needs to be done privately would be in that where you can see the exam table, and it might be just a very short assessment, whether it's for an OB patient or a diabetic patient or any other type of kind of chronic disease type patient. That can be done in that exam area, and then the rest of the space is more used for educational purposes. And again, the Affordable Care Act is really focusing on outcomes-based patient results, and education is going to play an increasingly important role in all of that. So these rooms will become more popular as we progress towards that Affordable Care Act. And again, it might be smoking cessation. Again, another trend is integrating behavioral health into primary care practices, and this could also be used for consults for behavioral health. The next slide that you see is kind of how it would fit into a typical practice. This is just an example of a practice, and it shows that the group exam room would typically be towards the front, and you can tell it occupies a space of roughly 4 exam rooms. Of course, you'd have to pick ones that don't have a column in the middle of it, but generally speaking, you can do that. The last one we're going to talk about, the prototype I, is kind of an exam plus room, we're calling it. And the exam plus room is really where there's a separation of the consult function and the exam function. And actually a physical separation with a wall. And this shows with a sliding door. We've done them or where that is just a partial wall and that sliding door isn't there. It also is based on that kind of work core type approach, and in this case the work core is on the lower side of the plan and the patient quarters on the upper side of the plan. The intent is that the patient would walk in the room and just see a kind of office type consultative space and not see the exam table, so again eliminating that kind of white coat effect. The room as a result needs to be fairly significantly larger than a typical exam room because of that separation. And on a recent project, we actually built mock-ups of the exam types A, D, and this I as a comparison, so full-size mock-ups. And there was concern at this size for this type of room that the space around the exam table is a little bit tight, and so it might need to get even a little bit larger than this to actually be successful. But it is something that certain health systems are exploring, again, to kind of provide more of a comforting environment for the patient.
Gary, before we move on, we have a question from Eileen English who asks, how does this exam plus room work in the context of the FGI guideline minimum exam square footage requirements for the exam room?
Well, we haven't run into any problems with that. It's considered one room. I guess we would have to check and see what that specifically, I'm not familiar with the exact clearances for the exam table, but it certainly would be designed to meet any FGI guidelines.
Okay, we also have a question asking about the dimension between the exam table and the hard wall there in this particular configuration. Do you know what that is specifically?
In this configuration, it would need to be at least 2 feet. I think that it appears that it's less than that on this diagram, but it would need to be at least 2 feet, and typically we'd want 30 inches on that side. In fact, I think as we looked at the mock-up, a relocation of the sink so that exam table could be more centered was the direction that we took when we built the mock-up. So it was actually the sink was sort of between, the door actually was a sliding door, changed to a sliding door because it was on the staff side, and the sink was moved to where the door is located.
All right, thank you, Gary. What we wanted to achieve with this article is just to add to the existing body of knowledge, to generate discussion, so we're delighted that we're chosen to do this. And we wanted to showcase some of the various exam room prototypes and the design strategies that are supported by some of the current empirical evidence that is available out there in ambulatory care settings. Overall, though, there is a general lack of research supporting some of these decisions, and they're really based off of just assumptions. we have identified some of these areas that do need further investigation, and this includes in our list the location of exam tables and privacy curtains as it relates to patient privacy and infection control, the typical sizes and location of consult tables as they relate to patient connection and communication. There's also discussion about transitioning from exam table to possibly just doing a chair examination. Seating preferences of both the care providers and patients as it relates to their comfort and satisfaction, and then the placement of the sink and sanitizing dispensers as they relate to frequency and patterns of usage, and also the reduction in hospital-acquired infections.
Kara, it's interesting. You did mention the chair as opposed to exam table approach, and of course we're seeing in emergency departments and observation areas this approach of keeping patients vertical, in a chair instead of on an exam table, because not all patients actually need to be examined on a table. Are you seeing a trend in increasing the number of those sort of chair-centric kinds of rooms in primary care clinics?
I have not. We had a discussion about this offline as a group, and we have not seen the trend towards it, mainly because you still need to provide an exam table for the patients that do come in and need to have the examination on the exam table.
I just wonder if there might be a percentage of, exams that maybe don't require it, those that do, and just seems like you could, save on some square footage, but then again, it might pose a scheduling challenge if you have, too many. Did you have some other conclusions that you wanted to mention as well, or any other comments, and then we'll take some more questions?
We can open it up for discussion at this point. We have some topics that we can discuss. Otherwise, if there's any other questions that came in through the presentation, we'd love to answer them at this time.
Well, there was one that came through earlier on at least one of the prototypes when I believe it was prototype B, but when you open the door, it actually blocks the view of the sink. And so, is that a problem, or I guess that's just one of the trade-offs, right? When you you get some benefit and some negatives on probably every single design.
Was that prototype E?
Maybe, I think that was E, yes.
Okay, let me see if I can flip back to it.
There it is.
And we can kind of see that right there on the table. Here we are. So, this is probably one of the trade-offs that we have been discussing. It does, although you do have somewhat of a reverse hinge here, we still have a privacy curtain shown in this prototype, but the door could very well just be flipped the opposite direction. The problem with that is if there is somebody sitting in that position area at the time, they would probably get hit by the door as it opens and fully opens.
I might mention that one of the other functions of the privacy curtain, in case we didn't say it before, but just to reemphasize, in this case, for this particular room, it was used so that an interpreter could sit at the charting desk during the exam process. And it's also, in some cases, a family member, somebody else who might want to be outside of the exam zone, but still able to hear what's going on between the care provider and the patient. The curtain does allow for that and allows for some privacy for that additional person.
I'm curious, actually. So I know there's probably, not this one best, this is the room. But I'm just curious if any of the three of you have sort of a personal favorite.
Well, we talked about that a little bit, and I guess, for us, it's not really about what our favorite is. It's what the care providers of the particular institution feel, and that's what we found through this whole research, is that there's no one single best answer to what is the best room. Physicians have their own different preferences, and those care providers have, in this case, for this particular room we're looking at, some people would feel that it's awkward that there's a sink behind the door. and the physicians in this case felt that the sink was not used as often. It was used mostly when there were, if there was some type of procedure, and that would keep all the procedural elements along one side of the wall. So that's what worked for them. Other people have seen this room and say, well, that doesn't seem to work. That happens in just about every case for just about every one of these rooms. There are nuances that are different, and really it boils down to what's most important in the design for that organization, for the culture of the organization and the physicians that practice within it. And we found the answer is, in most cases, very different. So I personally don't have any favorites, but I'll let Chris and Kara speak for themselves.
Well, and of course the specialty would also, depending on the specialty, that would have an impact on what design would work best. One of the, I would say, general layouts that we are seeing more often is prototype D. But again, that isn't necessarily the best solution for everyone. It's understanding the particular needs of the clinic and the specialty.
And I had a question from someone in my office here in Tampa. What size is the door that you're showing in these different prototypes?
I was going to mention that earlier. It's between 36 and 42 inches wide. I think most of them are 36 inches wide.
We are finding that typically there's a request to have larger doors into all of the exam rooms, which makes sometimes the reverse swing a little bit more problematic. By the time you get the 18 inches on the next to the door and a 42-inch door, you've really taken up a lot of the room space, and it can compromise where the exam table is.
We had a question, too, coming in about bariatric. You mentioned the fold-down seats. Do you know, do they make fold-down bariatric seats available?
I would doubt that, and it would be a concern, actually, if they did. I brought that up when we were talking about the bariatric slide, and so I hope that didn't confuse people. We were just talking about various types of seating. I talked about the bench on the previous slide, the importance of that, and then talking about the bariatric, and so added that comment in, and hopefully that didn't cause confusion. But no, I'm not aware of one that supports bariatric. There may be one out there, but I have not used it.
Well, I think the most popular folding chair that's in use ports about 450 pounds, but yes. Beyond that, I'm not aware of one.
Mm-hmm.
We also had a question, too. What about the issues in the case where the physician has to actually cross in front of the care partners or the family members to get to the care provider zone? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Sure. I think that's been, if we look at prototype A, that's, the most common exam room that's out there that typically happens. And honestly, we had from some organizations that they thought that was a good thing because it forced the physician to interact with the patient. Hard to believe, but that was a part of the philosophy. In my case, I think, and for my opinion, I think that it's a moment of it can be an awkward moment because the patient may have to pull their legs in to allow space for the provider to go by and things like that. It's not one of my favorite configurations, but mostly for that reason. I think it works better when the physician, when they're separated, such as in prototype C.
Now, we also had a question come in from Jonathan Clark, wanting to know if there's any particular reason that the door that you're showing in these prototypes is placed on the short wall as opposed to the longer wall. Is there a particular reason for that?
Typically, this is because of the functions within the exam room, it typically works out this way, and I guess the way they're arranged within the room. They can be done another way if you were kind of in a situation where that was the structural bay and you had to turn the rooms at 90 degrees. We've seen that on most cases, but I would say this is what we found to be the most typical configuration with the long distance
Yeah.
The doors being on the short side.
And these do support the whole module as you start putting them repetitively next to each other more efficiently.
Exactly.
We did have one question to come in regarding have there been any studies or noted benefits with the assumption of having an entrance for caregivers and an entrance for patients? Is there, any solid evidence making the case for that? Because obviously it takes up more square footage, which is more expensive to build and to operate.
Mm-hmm.
Have you
I am not aware of any studies that are available right now, but I could be mistaken. I haven't really done too much of a investigation on that particular topic area, but I know that is a topic that comes up is the on-stage, off-stage access and having that core area just for the staff. And I think like what we're seeing with all these prototypes is that there are trade-offs when you get to a larger module. It might be very supportive for specific types of specialties, different types of organizations in their model of care, but some may also find it hard to operate in that type of function, in that type of setting, or they don't see the benefit of having an open collaboration core and the off-stage corridor.
Now, Lori Wagner asks a question about your experience with the Jack and Jill exam type room, which I believe was in the paper, but we did not discuss in the talk here today. And that's, of course, where the consult space is shared between two patient exam rooms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It's actually the exam room is between two consult spaces, and the way we've seen it. And it's primarily been used in internal medicine practices, mostly because the bulk of the visit takes place in the consult area, and the exam room is used only for a short portion of that visit for the patient. So they've determined that their throughput on patients is better by providing two consult spaces with an exam room between them rather than three exam rooms. And that is a particular practice that we're aware of that has done that, and I don't know that we know the exact results on throughput totally on that.
Also a question regarding these prototypes. Have you done any work in validating these different prototypes with patient groups or trying to we talk about the care provider needs, but has there been any discussion about the patient needs and having them actually look at these prototypes?
Sure. I think that where that's occurred in many cases, as I mentioned earlier, on some projects we've done full-scale mock-ups. Oftentimes it's very difficult for caregivers as well as patients to be able to evaluate drawings. And so it's much more effective to have them evaluate physical space. And so by building mock-ups, you have the opportunity to bring not only the caregivers but also potential patients and administrators, everybody through the space, so that they can see what works for them and what things that they don't like about it. And again, it's very important to kind of be able to look at different options for that and also make those rooms very flexible so the mock-ups can be easily changed.
Once you've actually designed and built some of these different types of prototypes in practice, have you had an opportunity to do any post-occupancy evaluation and get any feedback from patients or their care partners about any of these specific prototypes?
We have not done post-occupancies on these. It's something that would be fun to do. We'd like to do it, but at this point we have not done it.
Okay, let's see. There's another question that just came in. Let me look at that real quick. It says that I've heard that in a typical office visit, 90% of the time it's done at the charting area. And this person wants to know if HGA has looked at the time within a zone and what is happening in each of the zones and how much time is spent. And I think, Carrie, you may have mentioned, too, that we may see a change in what activities actually occur currently in the exam room. We may not see all of those functions occurring in the exam room in the near future.
Yeah, especially when now we're going to the telemedicine or remote examinations, there might be a decrease in the need to come to an exam room because, like this individual pointed out, that 90% of the activity may not occur even on have to happen on the examination table. I've heard that number flux between 70 and 90%, that you actually don't have the exam portion of an exam appointment anymore. So these rooms might now just be set up for examination appointments only.
Well, and, you mentioned the telemedicine. I know the Cleveland Clinic has recently partnered with HealthSpot, which is, a little pod where a patient can go in and they have access to different instruments for taking vital signs and a camera, and a remote physician can give them an examination. Are you seeing a trend towards increasing more of these smaller types of remote exam kinds of rooms within the outpatient clinics?
Yes, I think we've seen a lot of different versions of that. In fact, I think we heard on the news the other day Mayo was partnering with Apple to actually have that a lot of the vitals could be on the new version, the new software that's going to be released, I think, in the fall. And in addition, Mayo also does a lot of telemedicine and offers those services for certain specialties to remote locations. And so, you can be with your primary care physician and a specialist from Mayo location, wherever it is, can be connected, and you can get that advice without having to travel all the way to one of the Mayo locations.
Now, we have another question regarding accessibility, and the question is whether or not most of these prototype rooms are large enough for wheelchairs to be used.
In most cases, the room can accommodate wheelchairs, and it's typically it's somebody would be in there with them, but the room is designed so that you can exit if there was someone in a wheelchair. You can get out of the room by yourself. In other words, so that it is accessible from that standpoint.
Okay, thank you. And another question asks if you've reviewed the VA exam room design guidelines, where the typical exam room is 10 by 12 minimum. Were those considered in this study that you did?
They weren't. I don't think they were really looked at for this study. These are really prototypes that we've designed for our clients in the past. But we do refer back to the VA guidelines really for inpatient care, and but they weren't really considered for the study, yes.
Okay, and we'll take one more question, then we'll do some wrap up, and then we can stay on if we get more questions in. The last question is, what sort of research is out there regarding contamination of portable computers and tablets and those kinds of things that are used in these outpatient settings or inpatient settings? I'm sure there's a lot of research that is out there. Most of the research that I've looked at is more about contamination of antimicrobial materials, and then also highly touched surfaces. Sheila, since you're a researcher, do you know any research that is available on those types of devices? I have seen some. I can't quote it, though, at the moment. I'd have to look into it. But, yeah, I know there is some that exists.
It is available.
And there are new types of keyboards that allow a much easier cleaning and have fewer of the crevices and so forth where the microbes can be harbored. So,
exactly.
But there is some that exists. We're getting just to the end of our time. Like I mentioned, we can stay on if more questions come in, but for those of you who do need to leave, I would just like to remind you that if you'd like to earn continuing education credits for this session, download the forms in the media library. And for the AIA, you need to purchase a CEU management fee, complete the CEU verification form and quiz, and email to Shannon Reckline. This event has been brought to you by the Center for Health Design's Research Coalition and the EDAC program. And we would like to give a special thanks to the Health Environment Research and Design Journal for making this article available to all of you who registered. And again, as I mentioned, if you haven't already done so, you might want to look into subscribing to HERD. And also, your feedback is really important, so if you can take this quick survey link at the bottom of the slide, that would be excellent. This concludes our formal event, but we will take some additional questions. Looks like they have some more coming in. So to those of you who have to leave, thank you for joining us. And to the rest of you, we'll stay on a little bit longer. Okay, here comes the study. After studies on infections in curtains, why do we still recommend layouts that require their usage regarding safety? I guess is a question that.
Well, there are some good reasons for that, and one is, again, as Gary mentioned, if there's an interpreter involved, or if there's a family member that you'd like to be present for, a cubicle curtain works well as a very as something who takes very little space but can provide visual privacy. So that is why it continues to be used.
And I don't think the study's been done on in a clinic environment for the infection issues related to curtains, but I could be wrong.
Mm-hmm. And I know cubicle curtain fabric manufacturers have over the years come up with products that resist infection, etc. And I have not done a study on that or read a study on that on how successful they are, but I know that's something that they're concerned with as well.
There's also disposable curtains available now, or portions of the curtain that you attach can be removed and disposed of, and those portions are usually the high-touch areas.
Mm-hmm. We have another question from Susan Young asking for comments on how effective using software for showing various prototypes versus full-scale mock-ups. And I'm imagining maybe you're talking about 3D software. I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but do y'all want to take a stab at that?
Sure. I think we use a variety of methods. A lot of times it's a 3D software that can show the rooms. Sometimes it's a 3D model or a physical model that's built to a scale of 1 inch equals a foot, something like that, to kind of initiate something when we don't have either the space to do a mock-up or the time. And so I think that those are effective tools to use. We found them to be not as effective as the full-scale mock-up. When people can see and touch and move things around in that physical environment, that generally is the most effective way. But there are many times when that's not possible, and we do use usually we use the software in an early phase, and the mock-ups can be done at actually any number of phases, from the beginning all the way through the end.
And they can be very low fidelity or very high fidelity, depending on where you are in the process. But, yeah, we found, too, that the mock-ups are just absolutely invaluable. Mm-hmm. We have another question that had come in prior to this session, and that has to do with looking at the sort of the micro efficiencies in the usage of the space. It might seem like there's little evidence or need for sort of improving the qualitative design aspects of the clinic exam room, and the patient is there just for a little short period of time. But the question wants to ask is there an evidence-based design argument for daylighting and views as an integral element of this clinic exam experience? What have you found in that respect?
Well, we had a discussion about that question, and what we decided was, that opportunity for the daylighting views should be more in the provided in the waiting room area and the corridor area as a source of positive distractions, so that when they come into the exam portion of their appointment, they're less stressed and feel less anxious.
And, I find that so often when there is a window and maybe nice daylight in the view, so often the blinds are
always
down.
closed.
But it is. I think it is nice if you can provide daylight and yet visual privacy for that patient as well. It's always a nice touch. Well,
I was going to say one thing that we found, though, in terms of a priority, the staff are there for the whole day, and providing spaces for staff that have access to daylight is a priority over providing spaces for patients in the exam rooms that have. So as we've looked at priority for natural light and views, it ends up being the waiting room, the corridors, and staff-related areas, because we need to take good care of the staff as well.
Boy, that's important. It's so expensive to train and recruit new ones if you lose the ones you have. Well, thank you so much to all three of you. We'd have no more questions coming in, and I would just like to thank you once again, and stay tuned. Hope all of you can join us for the next Evidence-Based Design Journal Club. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you all.